Social justice means applying the law equally to all people, but in practice, that doesn't always happen. I'm John Gonzalez. I'm here with my law partner, Jack DeRora. We practice law, we seek social justice. On this show, we reveal the conflict between the two.
You know, for a while, it was just us in the office over a cup of coffee talking about the news of the day. With social justice issues dominating our culture, our focus became, how do we as lawyers make a difference?
And now it's not just us. Today we have Flannery Rokeby Jackson with Chris, Community, Refugee, and Immigration Services, to talk about the expected changes to the Refugee Resettlement Program, immigration, I guess, in general,
Sure,
and the challenges their agency may face with the incoming administration. Welcome, Flannery.
Thank you for having me.
So I guess we can't talk about refugees and immigration without thinking about Springfield, Ohio.
right.
And what I guess surprised me or shocked me most, well, there were many things, but what off the top of my head was the way a sitting senator, especially from our state, threw this town under the bus for political reasons. And he was talking on a show after the rumors about the immigrants in Springfield, eating cats and dogs and saying that, well, it may not be true. It serves a point that he was trying to make in a broader issue. And I thought, what an admission for a sitting senator to make.
Oh, yeah, I love it. I'll make up stuff because it's okay to do that to make a point.
But more than that, Jack, is that it worked.
Well, it worked for a good reason. It worked for a good reason in that immigrants and a lot of the subjects we have on our show are not popular. You know, we talk about the death penalty. We talk about people in the penal system. We talk about the homeless, the immigrants. This is one of the many groups that society largely doesn't care about.
But for people to first believe that it could be true, and then second, there were people that acted on that information, right? I mean, they called in bomb threats to the schools. The immigrants there were in fear. And, certainly it was all politically driven to obtain votes. And the sad part about what's happening in our society is that it actually worked to drive people to the polls to vote for these conservative causes.
After all we've been through, Gonzo, I find it hard to believe that you're surprised by any of this, because we all know that when people are afraid or angry, they act badly.
There had to be a reason, Flannery, why Springfield and other cities want immigrants, and I might preface this by asking you, are refugees and immigrants basically the same groups?
So an immigrant is anyone who is not a citizen or a national of the United States who currently lives here. So there are hundreds of ways that people can come and be an immigrant in the United States. People who have student visas, who are studying at OSU or a different university. People who have work visas or have special visas for whatever reason. My mom is a green card holder from Canada. She's been a green card holder for, over 25 years now, and she is still an immigrant because she's not a citizen of the United States. That umbrella term includes refugees. And refugees are a sort of specific population within that group. A refugee is someone who's had to flee his or her home country because of war, violence, or persecution based on 5 protected grounds that the United Nations has declared. Those 5 grounds are race, religion, nationality, membership of a social group, or political opinion. And in order to be a refugee, somebody has to apply for that status through the UNHCR, that United Nations High Commissioner of Refugees. So I think we throw around the term refugee a lot, talking about anyone who's had to leave their home country for whatever reason. But the refugee, the legal term refugee, is very specific. And that's who's able to come through the refugee admissions program in the United States.
So staying with Springfield for a minute, those immigrants may not have been refugees through that program. They may have fled their homeland. What were they, Haitians?
They were for the most part, weren't they? Haitians?
Well, now, were they a part of your program? Did you settle Haitian refugees in Springfield?
So most of the Haitian immigrants in Springfield are under temporary protected status, or TPS, as we call it. And that is something that the United States government decides to basically postpone deportation of certain people from certain countries if there is a temporary situation in their home country that makes it unsafe for them to return to. We've also heard the term humanitarian parolee sort of used at the same time. And essentially they're the same. Humanitarian parolees come with that specific status to the United States, whereas temporary protected status holders are given that status once they're already here. But that status allows them to stay here for a temporary amount of time. Usually the United States decides it's 6 months or a year or 18 months, and then they may renew that again, depending on the country situation. And so Haiti is one of the countries that we have designated TPS for. We also have the same for people from Syria, people from Afghanistan. I think there are about 17 other countries as well. And so people with TPS have certain rights, but they don't actually come through the refugee admissions program.
I'm sorry, Jack. One more question.
Oh, I'm sorry for interrupting you.
So the Haitians come into the United States. They're under this TPS, and they could basically settle then almost anywhere, I take it. And they probably are going to places where there are other Haitians, either family or they found that they have some are welcomed in some way. Would I be correct in assuming that?
Exactly right. I mean, there are push factors from their home country and pull factors to different cities around the United States. So one of those are, existing community members that can help them find a job, integrate into the community. And then also we know that Springfield, because of the population of immigrants coming in, mostly Haitian immigrants, we've seen a huge economic revitalization of that community because those jobs and the housing was available there for them.
What I wanted to ask, so everybody from Haiti has sort of this blanket designation, or do individuals have to apply individually?
Most of the time, individuals have to apply for temporary protected status, although they have a very good chance of doing that if they have a specific country designation. That's not always true for the humanitarian parolee status. We saw that especially with Afghanistan after the fall of Kabul in 2021. It was more of a blanket designation that we gave that population.
So I'm in Haiti or I'm in a refugee camp in Kenya, and I want to have refugee status. What am I doing? Am I going to the American embassy in that country?
That's a good question. So in order to become an actual refugee through the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, you have to go to a United Nations office outside of your home country. So you have to flee your home country, go to your host country, which is usually a neighboring country nearby, and then literally walk into a United Nations office and say that you are going to apply for refugee status. And there are millions of people who do this every year. And in order to get that status, people have to provide oftentimes proof that they are who they say they are and that they are fleeing what they say they're fleeing. So that may include providing, tons of documentation with birth records and list of addresses and phone numbers. And then at that point, the United Nations can decide to give them refugee status. But that does not mean they're coming to the United States to be resettled anytime soon. A lot of times they will live in this life in limbo stage after they have received refugee status for years, 5, 10, 15 years, until they're actually resettled through our program.
I've had some very indirect contact with Chris. My daughter Allison somehow got connected with Chris years back when she was in college. And so we met an Iraqi couple. And they had both been in refugee camps. I think the wife had been in a refugee camp in Jordan. You ready for this, Gonzo? For 6 years. And then I read on your website a woman named Judette had been in a refugee camp for 14 years. And then I've read about this gigantic refugee camp, I think in Kenya, where people are there almost like forever. I just can't imagine the tremendous limbo they're in. Can you speak to, I mean, there are people who they live in refugee camps for year after year. Do you have any experience with that or any stories you can tell us?
Absolutely. I mean, you brought up Judette, who I worked with quite closely. And she had basically become an adult in a refugee camp. And both of her sons were born in the refugee camp as well. A lot of times we see, especially for refugees coming from different countries in Africa, a very, very long lifetime in a refugee camp. Oftentimes where children are born into the situation and have never experienced life outside of that camp until they are resettled here in the United States. So obviously it can be a really significant culture shock. We also, though, at the same time, see people who come quite quickly. So a refugee's experience can look really, really different depending on their situation, on their, country circumstances. So we've seen refugees who have been in refugee camps for 20 plus years. And then we see people who are displaced, more specifically from places like Afghanistan, who the day after the Taliban took over Kabul, they were arriving on planes in the United States.
Does money have anything to do with that, or social status in their country? Or is it more of a lottery system? I mean, how can somebody be there that long and somebody be there that short, but both end up in the United States?
I would love to say social status and money play absolutely no role, and they play no role officially. But I'm sure that people's lives in refugee camps look differently depending on where they were in their home country and who they are. But through the UNHCR, the UN will identify a good candidate for third country resettlement in the United States. And who may be a good candidate depends on the presidential determination made around October 1st every fiscal year. And that the president, in consultation with Congress, will decide the number of refugees to admit into the United States, the refugee ceiling, as well as the priority breakdown of what that ceiling looks like. So depending on the president, it could look like we have 100,000 refugee ceiling and we want 30,000 of those to come from Africa, 40,000 to come from the Middle East. Usually they look at what's going on in the world right now, who is being displaced, and who we want to resettle. We have seen also in the past presidents who want to prioritize people fleeing religious persecution, or maybe single mothers who are fleeing and need extra support. So it really depends on that presidential determination who will be considered as a good candidate for that resettlement in the United States. But even once they are referred into what we call the U.S. pipeline, that usually takes a number of years to actually get through all of the steps it takes. It includes numerous security checks and more interviews with the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, other agencies, medical checkups, cultural orientations, and so on.
Are there other countries besides the United States that accept refugees? And in thinking about that question, are we the country that are still preferred, or are there other countries that now might be preferred more? So we have been for a while a leader in refugee resettlement worldwide.
But a lot of other countries participate as well, like Canada, Australia, lots of countries in Western Europe. So we are all working together to eventually resettle this large group of people. I think it's about 37.8 million refugees in the world right now. And less than 1% of those are resettled every year. So even though it seems like globally we are doing a lot.
What was that percentage?
Less than 1%.
Oof.
Well, it's amazing to think of how many people are trying to relocate somewhere.
Yeah.
And we're getting a small percentage of that. And
I want to comment on your question about us being the preferred country. So most refugees have absolutely no say in where they're resettled. So they could be resettled in the United States. They could be resettled in Italy, Canada. They really have no decision-making power in that process. They could potentially be pushed into the U.S. pipeline because they have family here already. But other than that, there's really nothing that will change that for them.
In this moving of immigrants from their homeland to another country is largely a faction or a function of the UN?
Yeah, so the UNHCR is in charge of refugee resettlement along with IOM, which is the International Organization of Migration. So they're really doing all of the moving internationally. And then once they arrive in the United States, then it's the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, PRM, Population, Refugee, and Migration, that government body, and then the 10 national refugee resettlement agencies that do this work.
How do these people find their way to Chris? What's the connection between you and, I guess, ultimately the UNHC? Help me with that.
UNHCR, yeah. So the UNHCR works directly with the State Department, and our parent organization, which is called Church World Service, it's one of those 10 national agencies, has a contract with the State Department that is renewed every year and helps us fund our programming and go through all of the specifics about what refugee resettlement on the ground should look like. So a family's case is sent through the U.S. pipeline, goes to the State Department, and then it is sent to one of the 10 national agencies. And then CWS may decide that this family should be resettled in Columbus through their local affiliate office, CRIS. Kind of like people not having a decision in where or choice in where they can be resettled. They have no choice in where in the U.S. they would also be resettled. So they could come to Columbus through CRIS because we have an existing population here. We have a huge Somali population in Columbus. We will continue to resettle Somali refugees for years to come because we have that network on the ground already. It could be because they have family members or friends here, or it could be for no other reason other than we have the capacity to take on this case. So we usually learn a family is coming to us, to Columbus, about 2 to 4 weeks before they arrive. Although recently we've had some shorter turnaround times, like 48 hours, 72 hours. So in the time between when we have their travel notice and their actual arrival date, we try to find housing, prepare for their arrival, and then we will literally meet them at the airport as they step off the plane.
So does Chris then at the, I'm going to say local level, decide Columbus or Cleveland or somewhere else, or are you told where the refugees are supposed to at least start?
So our work all happens within 100 miles of our CRIS office in Upper Arlington. So we mostly resettle within Columbus. I mean, now we're, dabbling in Dublin and Hilliard and Gahanna. But we usually just do work in Columbus. There are other agencies in Cleveland, Dayton, and Cincinnati. So they do that resettlement work there.
Does the city of Columbus or Dayton or Upper Arlington have any say? Or is this purely a federal mandate or dictate that these refugees are coming and find a place for them?
To my understanding, this is a federal program, and we've just been supported by the city. And I'm sure that if Columbus didn't want us here, then we wouldn't be here. But I think we're that city that wants to welcome refugees. And so we will continue to get refugees because we're, federally funded.
I think about the governor of Florida taking refugees, actually, I think from Texas, and flying them to some other city. Are these the refugees that would be coming through your program, or do you have any idea when we think about those,
those political stunts?
Yeah, the political stunts. Because apparently those folks are in the country legally, and they're going somewhere, but the Florida governor is seeming to be the person that wants to dictate where they go.
Yeah, so most of the people who were put on those buses or planes are asylum seekers, which is, I always like to say, a completely legal status for somebody to be here as an asylum seeker. So asylum seekers are usually fleeing exactly the same things that refugees are fleeing, but instead of going through the United Nations to receive refugee status, they go through a country's government to receive asylum. So usually we think about people at the southern border being asylum seekers, but we receive asylum seekers at every single port of entry in the United States. And someone will arrive at the port of entry and declare they're seeking asylum in the United States. And then that is when they're held in a detention center for an indefinite period of time while the U.S. government decides if we will hear their case for asylum or not. And if we agree to hear their case for asylum, they will be released and given a court date. Usually that court date is at least a year in the future at this point, more like 18 months we're seeing. And in that time, it can be very difficult for asylum seekers because they are not work eligible. They are not able to access any kind of benefits. They're not able to access the services that we provide at CRIS because we're federally funded to do that for refugees, not asylum seekers. And so they usually end up in places like Florida and Texas. And then that's when the governors, like you said, decide to send them elsewhere to, I guess, show off, or I don't know. It didn't really end up very well last time, right? But so we've expected actually a couple of buses like that in Columbus. Didn't happen in the same way. But we do receive asylum seekers here because there are jobs available. So they may hear in a detention center, oh, there's nice people in Columbus, there are nice jobs in Columbus, and they'll get on a bus, come here. But they're really on their own. We don't have as many services for them.
I want to get back to the fact that you said just 1% of refugees gets resettled. So the other 99% are just languishing in these various gigantic refugee camps that exist around the world?
Yes. Although not all of them are held in refugee camps. Although that is the image that we always think of when we think of refugees, a lot of refugees are what we call urban refugees. And so they will live in their host country, in a city in their host country. So we have a lot of Syrian refugees who are have been living in Beirut for 10 years now, or Syrian refugees living in Amman, Jordan. There are often restrictions on what benefits and what those refugees can have and what jobs those refugees can have, which will keep them from integrating into Jordan or Lebanon and staying there forever. And so a lot of refugees actually are in that situation rather than the refugee camp that we always imagine.
And I imagine that, I'm going to say the refugee business has been actually climbing over the years because the world's becoming more unstable. Syria is a great example. Even before Bashar al-Assad was toppled a few days back, I think there were a couple million people fleeing Syria.
Yep. Yeah. According to the UNHCR, we are at the highest ever recorded number of displaced people in the world right now. Some of those are refugees. More of them are internally displaced. So they are still within the borders of their home country, but they've had to flee their homes, towns, villages, cities because of war, violence, persecution. More often, we're seeing climate disaster as well. So most people are considered to be internally displaced, but we are still at a record number right now of displaced people.
Let's talk about real lives for a minute. First question is, in light of what we hear from certain political candidates about criminality, I'd like to know what the experience of Chris is with the people it helps, what level of criminality there is. The second thing is, give me an example of a family and what you do for them and how they blend in and how they carry on in this brand new setting.
Sure. So your first question about criminality. I've personally never experienced helping a family resettle here and then seeing them turn to any kind of crime, especially with refugees who are working with. They are required to apply for their green card after 1 year in the United States. And if they commit any kind of crime, even a misdemeanor, that could jeopardize that ability to get their green card. So I have worked with families who won't even jaywalk across the street with me because they don't want to break the law. They're also so excited to start their new lives and to join the workforce, get jobs, go to school, and become contributing members of society. More so than I would say my interactions with local-born Americans has been. There are so many families I could talk about. When I think about the importance of our work and what our work really looks like, I guess I'll mention there was a family of 12 from Sudan who came a few years ago. With 2 parents and 10 children, now 11 children. They welcomed their first citizen of the United States who was born here last year. And we were very worried about that. Even just finding housing for a family of 12 is difficult. But thankfully, around Ohio State, we have a lot of frat houses. So we were able to resettle this family in a former frat house. And they have filled it up with so much love, and it's pretty amazing to see. And their neighbors have been helping them. Every kid who is of the age to go to school is in school and doing incredibly well. I just saw that the oldest daughter was Student of the Month at Columbus Global Academy last year. It's pretty amazing to see both parents are working. The older kids are teaching the younger kids English every day and teaching them math. And they've only been here for about 2 years now. And while they still struggle with, paying the bills and fully integrating into our community, they have also provided so much for our community and our community at Chris. When we welcome a new Sudanese family or a Sudanese single person at the airport, she always cooks the welcome meal for them because she wants them to feel at home in the United States. So even though we worked hard to welcome them, they're helping us welcome others now.
Are the refugees free to move around, to leave the city, and is there any type of monitoring?
Yes, absolutely. So as a refugee, you have a number of different rights and responsibilities. And one of those rights is that you are able to travel or live anywhere in the United States. So even though somebody is sent to Columbus to be resettled through Chris, they're not stuck here if they don't want to be here. And it's happened before where you meet somebody at the airport and they say, oh, I have a friend in California. We're going to move to California. And that's absolutely their right to do so. At that point, it's our job to then connect them with a local refugee resettlement agency in the area where they're going. after their first few months of resettlement, it's the first 3 months technically they're in their resettlement period, they are free to do whatever they wish and go wherever they want in the United States. That said, their travel is limited because they are not able to have a U.S. passport, and their passports from their home countries are usually invalid. So they have a limited travel document given to them by USCIS. So most of the time, they're not able to travel internationally at all, but they are able to travel wherever they'd like in the United States.
These families, you talk about contributing to, the local community. Do you help them find jobs, and do some of them come in with some very specific skill sets that are needed? And I'm thinking of like engineering or things of that, medicine.
Yeah. So we have a full employment program. We do a lot to help find employment, hopefully within the first couple of months of somebody's resettlement here. And a lot of our clients do come in. They were doctors, lawyers, engineers in their home country. Unfortunately, a lot of times those credentials don't transfer to be able to do that kind of work in the United States. So they're left with a tough decision between going back to school immediately, not making any money to support their family and paying money to go back to school to get those credentials, or to take a different job. And usually the latter is really the only option they have. So a lot of times our clients will start working in the logistics, construction, trade, and auto sectors. And then they may stick with those and move up within the industry, or after a couple of years, then they may go back to school, be able to practice medicine or law here in the United States, and then go back to their former career. But it can be very physically difficult working in a warehouse all day, usually third shift, but also emotionally difficult if you're somebody who is, spent 20 years delivering babies and now you're delivering Amazon packages.
Sure. So unlike the situation at the border, both the way it really is and the way we hear about it, where it seems like the United States doesn't have control of who comes in the country. We have a lot of control over the refugees, is what I'm hearing.
Absolutely.
Can the president say 0 refugees? Is that, and I don't mean it, does he have the authority to do that, but is that something that your organization worries about? Or is it one of those things, as long as we're in the UN, we're going to be taking refugees?
Okay. So I will say what we've seen in the past, because it's really hard to know what's going to happen after January 20th.
It is, except Trump was in for 4 years,
Right.
So he has some type of track record,
Right.
I assume. Okay.
So starting in 2016, we saw a significant decrease in the number of refugees allowed in the United States. For context, the refugee program that we still use today started in 1980 with a ceiling of about 235,000 refugees. And typically that refugee ceiling that I talked about was more of like a goal. It wasn't really a ceiling that was restricting the number of refugees. It was how many refugees can we resettle realistically? And it steadily sort of went down from there. And then in 2016, it was knocked down, I think, first to 35,000, then 20,000 the next year. And we got all the way to 15,000 in 2020. And that was the lowest it has ever been in the United States. Along with just a lower refugee ceiling, we had a number of other policy barriers put in place that unfortunately, we are worried will be brought back, including the travel ban, or the Muslim ban, as people called it, because while that wasn't specific to refugees, it included refugees. So we basically saw nobody coming from Somalia or Iraq or any of the countries that were on that flagged list, which, especially for Chris, since a lot of the people that we resettle are from Somalia, Syria, Iraq, we saw, a huge slump in numbers coming in. Is it possible that it will be 0? I think it is possible. I really hope it's not going to happen. There have been rumors about the refugee program being canceled. We did see last time the refugee program being paused for a while, so we had months of absolutely no one coming in. But I am hoping that is not the case. Although even if we see refugee arrivals decrease, there are still a lot of other people who are already here who still need quite a bit of help. And so hopefully Chris can still be there to do that.
There's a lot of fear-mongering in the last election about the squandering of government. Nobody used the word squandering, but the payment of government benefits to immigrants who aren't citizens yet. Can you speak to that? I mean, what are immigrants entitled to? I have no clue, but I know what a certain party was telling us.
Right. So obviously it depends on what somebody's status is for what benefits they can access. I'll talk specifically about refugees first. So a study came out. It was done in 2019 that looked at refugees who were resettled from 2005 through 2019. It was done by the former administration and basically swept under the rug until recently it came out, I think about a year ago, because their findings weren't what they wanted them to be. So essentially, refugees and asylees, so people who have asylum, pay back over $100 billion more than was spent on them in benefits. And of course, we see refugees using benefits more earlier on in their resettlement. And then once they're 10 years after resettlement, they are paying back into the system quite significantly. We also hear a lot about undocumented immigrants using benefits and not paying back into the system, when really it's the exact opposite. So we see undocumented immigrants, I think the latest numbers were close to $50 billion, paying $50 billion into federal, state, and local taxes, but they are not able to access any of it. So they are just paying into the system and not taking anything out.
Well, let's get specifics. Can immigrants of various types, are they eligible for supplemental nutrition, SNAP?
Yes, so refugees are able to receive food stamps. They're able to receive certain cash benefits. They receive Medicaid. So that is all incled. But we do see that over time, refugees will pay back all that and more. But depending on other people's immigration statuses, like undocumented immigrants, they do not have the same kind of access to those benefits.
Thank you. It was always unclear to me. I just knew not to believe entirely everything I heard.
You were talking about the ceiling being decreased on the amount of refugees that we're allowing into our country. Did it get better over the last 4 years?
Yes. So when the Biden administration took office, he made an executive order that immediately increased the ceiling from that 15,000 number to 62,500. And then the past couple of years, we've had a ceiling of 125,000. Although we haven't resettled 125,000 people in the last few years because we've spent a lot of time and energy trying to rebuild the broken infrastructure that we saw during the Trump administration. So when I started at Chris, we had about 35 full-time employees, and now we have over 120. So we've grown significantly as an agency, and our ability to resettle has. And we've only been able to build back that strength over the past couple of years.
So when you think about the state level and you think about Ohio, we've got cities in Ohio that claim they want to revitalize, that they've lost populations, people have left the cities, people have left the state. This is the perfect solution, isn't it?
Absolutely. Refugees are more likely to be in the labor force And they are more than twice as likely here in Central Ohio to own a business. So we see refugees being entrepreneurs and actually creating jobs for others who come in. I think if we look around Central Ohio, we've actually seen communities be completely revitalized by these immigrant and refugee groups that have come in. And I think Springfield also started to see that as well. And there were plenty of people who were born and raised in Springfield who started to really appreciate the role that immigrants and refugees and people on temporary protected status were able to have in revitalizing that community.
Well, it seems to me too, it's economic. So if you have the influx is a lot of people in a very short time, it's hard to get up to speed to the schools, things like that. But if it's a slow increase over time, it seems to be easier to adopt them into our communities. But how is the state of Ohio? Do you work with the governor's office? Do you have liaisons that encourage this or discourage it, or is the state pretty much out of it from where you sit?
We have a refugee state coordinator who is through the government. So they work in that department doing all of the behind-the-scenes work that is way above my pay grade. But they are working directly with, the state government. And we know here in Ohio that refugees and immigrants bring jobs and make Ohio great. So Ohio is one of the top states in the United States to actually resettle refugees. And I think we've seen the benefits from that.
I've personally had great experience with the Somalians. A lot of my clients were truck drivers and, like you said, entrepreneurs and just hardworking, dedicated to their families. And, I've always enjoyed that relationship. And to learn about some of their struggles before they came to the United States, it's a whole different world that I bet a lot of people like me up to that point had no idea what they were going through. And I can see when you say when they come here, they're like, wow, this is wonderful. I'm not going to screw it up by jaywalking or doing something else, right? They just, right. The freedoms that they must have here in this country compared to where they came from, and probably like, being in a different planet for them.
I would guess that when somebody has the gumption and the determination to leave his home country and go to another country where he has few, if any, connections, has to learn a language, has to learn a whole new way of living, that's a pretty determined person who probably has a higher likelihood of succeeding in life than what we would refer to as the average Joe. I mean, just think about it. I imagine, Gonzo, somebody says, hey, you're going to go to Germany and you're going to start all over again and you're going to get a job there. You'd probably think, I don't think I'm going to do that.
I'm nervous about going back to Spain to see where my grandfather was born. But I hope that the refugees that you work with understand that there's a lot of us that are supportive and think that, it's a good thing that they're here. I hope they're not demoralized by what they see or hear because, and maybe I'm being naive, Jack, but I hope it's not the majority of people that feel like they shouldn't be here or should be, deported, in January.
It probably isn't, but the minority is tremendously vocal. And, one last comment. We've talked on this show, Flannery, about the homeless population, the domestic homeless population. And I see the refugee immigrant problem being sort of the same thing on a larger scale. We didn't have that, at least I don't think we had that big of a homeless problem 30 years ago. Well, it's pretty significant today because of a variety of economic reasons. And this immigrant refugee problem is only going to get worse because conflicts are increasing. And in both cases, those are unpopular subjects. I hate to say it. It's easy to politicize and demonize is the problem, and scapegoat.
Well, Flannery, thanks for coming and talking to us. I do think that knowledge is the key to understanding and to compassion. And what you've told me today is something that I didn't know before you and I spoke. And hopefully you're out there talking about the refugees and how important they are to society. But we appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. It's my favorite thing to do, so I'm always happy to chat.
Well, it was wonderful having you with us. Our thanks to Dalton Jones, our sound engineer, and WOSU for hosting us. We'll be back in another week or so with another important social justice issue. Until then, so long and happy holidays.